So, here's the thing, I never thought taking my little brother to school would lead to the roller coaster of a day that it did. To be honest, I was just going to give him a ride since my parents were caught up with something. You know, the usual family favor thing. No big deal. But looking back, I'm pretty sure I unknowingly stepped into a chain of events that would forever change the way I saw my family and myself. We've always had an interesting relationship, me and my brother. He's the type of guy who can't sit still, constantly gets into trouble, and is always up to something. I'm a bit more laid back, reserved even, and I tend to stay out of his drama. But that morning, something felt off. He was unusually quiet as we got in the car, staring out the window like he had a ton on his mind. I figured he was just tired, but there was this weird tension in the air. "Everything all right?" I asked, trying to break the silence. He looked at me for a second, then shrugged. "Yeah, just, you know. Stuff." I nodded, but my gut told me that stuff wasn't just the usual teen angst. Something more was going on, but I didn't know what. Yet. As we drove toward the school, I noticed my brother's usual chatter was completely absent. Normally, he'd be cracking jokes or complaining about homework, but today he was distant. I tried to ignore it and focus on the road, but it was hard not to feel the weight of the silence. It wasn't like him at all. "Hey," I said, glancing over at him. "You sure you're good?" He turned his head to look out the window again, his face tense. For a moment, I thought maybe he was just trying to be cool or act tough, but then he mumbled something I didn't catch. I asked him to repeat it. "I'm not sure I want to go to school today," he said, almost like he was speaking to himself more than me. This caught me off guard. "What? Why not?" I asked, genuinely confused. He didn't usually mind school. It wasn't his favorite place, but he never outright avoided it. He sighed, shaking his head. "I dunno. Just, a lot of stuff going on there." I could tell he didn't want to talk about it, so I didn't press him further. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something serious was going on. As we got closer to the school, the tension seemed to grow thicker. Then, things got even stranger. We pulled up to the school, and I was getting ready to drop him off like usual. But just as he reached for the door handle, he stopped. "Wait," he said, his voice shaky. "I can't just go in like this. Not today." I turned to look at him, unsure of what was happening. "What do you mean? It's just a regular day, right?" He looked at me with wide eyes, then glanced around the parking lot like he was scanning for something or someone. It was like the world had suddenly shifted, and he was on high alert. "Just wait here for a second," he said quickly, before I could even respond. Before I knew it, he was out of the car, moving fast, and I was left sitting there, completely confused. I wasn't sure what he was up to, but the look on his face made me nervous. I sat there for a minute, thinking maybe I should just drive off and leave him to deal with whatever was going on. But something told me this wasn't a simple mood swing. So, against my better judgment, I decided to follow him. I put the car in park and stepped out, keeping a safe distance so I wouldn't freak him out. He was walking quickly across the school parking lot, heading toward the back entrance, not looking back once. I wasn't sure if I should be worried or if this was just some weird, impulsive decision on his part. Either way, I had to know what was going on. I followed him across the parking lot, trying to stay low-key. At this point, my heart was beating a little faster than usual. I had no idea what was happening, but something felt seriously off. My brother had never been this secretive, even when he was going through phases of rebellion or acting out. This was different. He reached the back entrance, the one usually used by staff and sometimes late arrivals. My brother was fast, but not fast enough for me to lose him. I took a deep breath and pushed the door open just a crack, trying not to make a sound. I could see him standing there, talking to someone. Not just anyone, though. The someone was a girl I had never seen before. She was dressed in a dark hoodie, and her face was partially hidden by the hood, but there was something about her presence that struck me as unusual. She was laughing, but it wasn't the kind of laugh that made you think everything was okay. It was the kind of laugh that made your skin crawl. I tried to get a better look, but just as I moved closer, my foot accidentally hit a metal can, sending it rolling across the ground. The sound was loud in the quiet schoolyard, and my brother snapped his head around, catching sight of me immediately. "Why the hell are you following me?" he shouted, his voice louder than I expected. I froze. And then, it all fell apart. I swear, my heart stopped in that moment. I never expected him to flip out like that, especially in front of this stranger. But there was no turning back now. The cat was out of the bag. I froze, standing there in the shadows, my mind racing. He was angry, like really angry, and the girl just stood there, eyes flicking from him to me, with an unsettling smirk on her face. I didn't know what to do. Should I leave? Should I approach him? Should I act like I hadn't just invaded his private moment? He stormed over to me, his face red intense. "What the hell, man? I told you to wait in the car." His voice was sharp, and I could feel the sting of his words. This was no longer just a casual brotherly moment, it felt like something had snapped. I didn't know what had triggered him so badly, but I couldn't just stand there. I was his older brother. I had to be the one to keep things together. "Hey, relax, okay? I'm just trying to help," I said, trying to calm him down, but my words just seemed to make things worse. "Help? You think you're helping by spying on me? By following me around like some creep?" he yelled, his voice cracking. I could see the hurt in his eyes, and it gutted me. This wasn't just teenage rebellion. This was something deeper, something raw. I'd never seen him this vulnerable before. The girl behind him stepped forward, her arms folded, and gave me a look that was part challenge, part warning. "Maybe you should leave him alone. He's fine." Her voice was cold, calculating, and for the first time that day, I felt a real chill run down my spine. I stood there, caught between the tension of my brother and this stranger. I was trying to process everything. What was going on here? Why was my brother so angry? Why did he need to keep this girl hidden? My head was spinning, and all I wanted was some kind of explanation. "Listen," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, "I'm not here to make things worse. I just want to understand what's going on. You're my brother, Stop," he interrupted, his voice cutting through the air. "You think you understand? You don't. You have no idea what it's like to deal with all this crap, to feel like I'm suffocating every single day." His face twisted with frustration. "I don't need you hovering over me, acting like you're some kind of hero." The girl, who, by now, I realized might not be a stranger, took a step back, almost as if she were letting him do the talking. And that's when I saw it. The look in his eyes wasn't just anger, it was pain. Deep, raw pain that I'd never really seen before. I stood there, trying to process what he'd just said. Suffocating? What was he talking about? We'd never been the closest brothers, but I never thought he was feeling something like that. The whole situation was unraveling fast, and I had no clue how to stitch it back together. "Who is she?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, but I had to know. I couldn't keep standing there like an idiot pretending I didn't see what was going on. He looked at me for a long time, his jaw clenched, before finally answering. "Her name's Emily. She's been helping me with some stuff. Stuff you wouldn't understand." I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. "Helping you? With what?" His eyes flashed with an emotion I couldn't quite place. "Just forget it, okay? Just go. Please." I stood there, stunned by his words. "Helping you with stuff? What kind of stuff?" My mind was reeling, but I could see that pushing him right now was only going to make it worse. He was shutting down, and the more I tried to pry, the more he seemed to pull away. "Look, I didn't come here to start a fight," I said, trying to keep my cool, even though everything inside me was screaming for answers. "But you can't just hide things from me, man. I'm your brother. If something's going on, we deal with it together." Emily, if that was really her name, finally spoke up, and her voice was more serious than before. "Maybe he doesn't want to deal with it together, okay? Maybe he wants to handle it his own way. I was taken aback by the way she was defending him. She wasn't just some random girl, she seemed to know him in a way I didn't. And that made me even more uneasy. My brother looked at her for a long moment, then back at me, his face suddenly weary. You don't get it. This isn't something you can fix. You don't know what I've been going through. His voice broke at the end, and I could see the raw emotion he was trying so hard to suppress. I swallowed hard, suddenly realizing the weight of the situation. This wasn't just about him being a teenager who hated school. There was something deeper at play, something he'd been carrying alone for a while. And that scared me. The last thing I wanted was for him to feel like he had to face it by himself. Okay, then, I said, my voice softer now, more understanding. I'm not going to push you. But I need you to know, I'm here. Whenever you're ready to talk. For a moment, I saw a flicker of something in his eyes, maybe relief? Maybe shame? But whatever it was, it disappeared almost as quickly as it came. He turned to Emily, and without another word, she nodded and walked off, leaving the two of us alone in the silence of the parking lot. I stood there for a few seconds, unsure of what to do next. My brother had already started to walk back toward the school, his shoulders hunched like he was trying to make himself as small as possible. I hated that I didn't know how to fix things for him. I hated that I was just standing here, feeling useless. I took a deep breath and followed him, keeping a good distance so he wouldn't feel like I was crowding him. The last thing I wanted was for him to shut me out completely, but I didn't want to make things worse by pushing him. We reached the entrance of the school together, but when we got to the door, he stopped and turned to face me. His eyes were filled with so much uncertainty, it almost made my chest ache. He opened his mouth like he was going to say something, but no words came out. I'm sorry, he finally muttered, and for the first time that day, he looked genuinely sorry. Not just about the fight or the things he said to me, but about everything. I was a little surprised. For what? For being a jerk, he said, his voice almost inaudible. I didn't mean to blow up on you. I've just been dealing with so much crap, and I didn't want to burden you with it. The way he said it, I could hear the weight of everything he was carrying. My heart softened, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I just wanted to hug him. But I didn't, because I knew that wouldn't be what he needed right now. You're not a burden, man, I said, trying to make it sound as genuine as I could. You don't ever have to go through things alone. I'm your brother. We've got each other's backs, okay? He looked at me, his expression still conflicted, but something had changed. A shift, a crack in the wall he'd built around himself. Thanks, he said quietly, and for the first time that day, it felt like he meant it. We stood there for a moment, just looking at each other. It wasn't one of those perfect moments of resolution you see in movies, but it was something. There was still so much I didn't know, so much I was still worried about. But at least I knew that my brother wasn't completely shutting me out. Before I could say anything else, he broke the silence. There's more to it, you know? Stuff I haven't told you. I nodded, trying to keep my emotions in check. I figured there was more, but you don't have to talk about it if you're not ready. Just know that whenever you are, I'll listen. I'm not going anywhere. He didn't respond at first, just stood there staring at his feet. After what felt like an eternity, he spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't want you to think I'm weak, or that I can't handle things. It's just, sometimes it feels like I'm drowning. I'm trying to keep it all together, but it's like everything is falling apart, and I don't know how to fix it. Hearing him say that broke me. I never realized how much he was struggling on his own. My brother, the one who always seemed so confident and ready to take on anything, had been silently carrying this burden alone. Dude, I said, my voice thick with emotion. You're not weak. And it's okay to struggle. We all do. But you don't have to do it alone. I know we don't always see eye to eye, but I've got you. I always will. He didn't say anything after that, but for the first time, I saw the walls around him start to crack. There was vulnerability in his eyes, and that was something I hadn't seen in a long time. We stood there for a while longer, neither of us saying much. It was strange, really, this weird mix of tension and understanding. We were still brothers, still family, but there was this new layer between us, something we both knew we couldn't ignore anymore. Eventually, he broke the silence again. "I'll tell you everything eventually. I'm not ready yet." I nodded. "Whenever you're ready, man. You don't have to rush. Just, don't keep it all inside for too long." He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, then sighed. "I know. I'll try." We stood there for a minute longer, and then, without another word, he turned and walked into the school. I watched him go, feeling a weird mixture of pride and concern. Part of me wanted to rush after him, make sure everything was okay, but I knew that wasn't the answer. He had to figure this out on his own, but now he knew he didn't have to do it alone. I got back into the car and started to drive home. My mind was still racing, trying to piece together what had just happened. I never expected any of this. One minute, I was just giving my brother a ride to school, and the next, I was witnessing a side of him I hadn't known existed. It was like a switch had flipped, and all of a sudden, everything felt different. The drive home was quieter than usual. I kept replaying the conversation in my head, trying to make sense of everything. The things my brother said, the way he opened up just a little bit, it wasn't a complete breakthrough, but it was something. I could feel that something inside of him had shifted, even if it was just a crack. But that crack was enough for me to know he wasn't as closed off as I thought. When I got home, I thought I'd just go through the motions of my day. But as I walked inside, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, expecting a text from a friend or something routine, but it wasn't. It was my brother. I almost didn't open it, worried it would be something he'd regret sending, but my curiosity got the better of me. I unlocked my phone and read the message. "I need to talk. Can you pick me up after school today? I think I'm ready to tell you everything." I stared at the screen for a second, my chest tightening. I wasn't expecting this. I thought it would take days, maybe weeks, before he was ready to talk to me again. But here he was, reaching out. And that felt like a big step. A huge one. I immediately texted back, telling him I'd be there. And honestly, the whole rest of the day felt like a blur. I couldn't focus on anything. All I could think about was what my brother was going to say, what he was going to tell me, and how it would change things between us. I kept telling myself that it was a good thing, that it meant we were on the right path. But I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever he was going to reveal, it wasn't going to be easy. The clock seemed to drag on as I waited to pick him up. My mind was racing. What is he going to tell me? The uncertainty was gnawing at me. Was he going to talk about some trouble at school? Was it something deeper, like bullying or mental health struggles? I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever it was something heavy. He wasn't the type to ask for help easily, and now here he was, about to open up to me. I left the house early to make sure I was there on time. The whole drive to the school felt like I was in some weird, slow-motion limbo. I tried to calm myself, telling myself that this was a good thing, he was ready. But it didn't make the waiting any easier. When I pulled into the school parking lot, I saw him standing by the front entrance, looking around like he was waiting for me to show up. He was pacing a little, and I could see the tension in his body. He still looked a little uneasy, but there was a certain determination in his steps. As soon as he spotted me, he waved and started walking toward the car. I rolled down the window, and he slipped inside without saying a word. His eyes met mine for just a second, but then he looked down, his fingers fidgeting with the edge of his hoodie. I could tell he was nervous, but he was still holding it together. "You ready?" I asked, keeping my tone as calm as possible. He hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah. I think so." I started the car and pulled out of the parking lot, keeping the silence between us. He was clearly in a fragile state, and I didn't want to rush him. I knew he needed to process whatever was coming next. But the quiet wasn't uncomfortable, it felt more like an unspoken agreement. He was gathering his thoughts, and I was giving him the space to do so. We drove for a few minutes, the hum of the car filling the void. Then, as if on cue, he broke the silence. "I don't really know where to start," he muttered, looking out the window. "I've been hiding a lot of stuff. Not just from you, but from everyone. And I think I'd been lying to myself about it too." My stomach dropped. I wanted to say something, reassure him, but I knew this was his moment, not mine. "It started a while ago," he continued, his voice quiet but steady. "I've been feeling off. Like something's wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on it. I've been struggling with stuff at school, grades, friends, everything. But that's not the worst of it. I've been feeling really isolated, you know? Like no one gets it. And the thing is, I thought I could just push through it, but I couldn't. And I started doing things to make it feel better, but it just made everything worse." I glanced over at him, but he kept his eyes on the road ahead, his face tense. My heart was pounding as I braced myself for the confession. "I've been drinking," he said, the words coming out in a rush. "Just to cope with everything. At first, it was just a little here and there. But it's gotten worse. I've been sneaking bottles, and it's starting to spiral out of control. I've been trying to hide it, but I can't anymore. I'm scared, man." I could feel the weight of his words like a physical punch. It was all I could do to keep my voice steady as I replied. "I had no idea, bro. I had no idea you were going through all this." He exhaled, his shoulders slumping. "Yeah, I know. I've been trying so hard to keep it together. I didn't want to disappoint you, or anyone. I thought I could fix it myself, but it just keeps getting worse." We sat in silence for a moment after he finished speaking. I could feel the heaviness in the air between us, like a thick fog. I wanted to say something comforting, something that would make it all better, but I knew there were no quick fixes for what he was going through. He had opened up to me, but this was only the beginning. The real work was just starting. I focused on the road ahead, trying to gather my thoughts. This isn't just about the drinking. This is about everything he's been holding inside. My mind raced with a million thoughts. What could I do to help him? How could I make sure he didn't feel alone in this? What could I say that wouldn't make him shut down again? I reached over and put a hand on his shoulder. It was a small gesture, but I needed him to know I was there. "I'm proud of you for telling me," I said softly. "I know it wasn't easy. And I know it's not going to be easy from here on out. But you're not alone in this, okay? We'll figure this out together. I've got your back, no matter what." He turned to me, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I saw a tear slip down his cheek. "I'm scared, man," he whispered. "I don't want to mess things up even more. I don't want to be the screw-up." "You're not a screw-up," I said, my voice firm. "We all go through tough stuff, and it doesn't make you weak. It doesn't make you a failure. You're my brother. I'm here to help you get through this, and we'll figure out what to do next. Together." He nodded slowly, wiping at his eyes with the sleeve of his hoodie. It was a small gesture, but to me, it felt like a huge step. He was allowing himself to be vulnerable, letting me in, something he had never done before. As we drove through the streets, I thought about everything he'd shared. It was going to be a long road ahead, and I knew there would be challenges. But this moment, his openness, was the beginning of something better. We didn't have all the answers yet, but at least now, we could face whatever was coming, side by side. The rest of the drive was quieter, but in a different way than before. It was more peaceful now, like the storm had passed and we were both catching our breath. I could tell my brother felt a little lighter, though he was still carrying the weight of everything he'd shared. But that weight wasn't his to carry alone anymore. When we pulled into the driveway, I turned off the engine and looked at him. He wasn't smiling, but there was something different in his eyes, maybe hope, maybe relief, or maybe just the tiniest bit of peace. "Thanks," he said quietly, his voice small but sincere. "For listening. For not freaking out." I smiled. "I'm always going to listen. And I'm not going anywhere. You're not alone in this." He nodded, then paused for a moment, as if thinking about something. You think things will get better? He asked, his voice hesitant. I know things can get better, I said, feeling a surge of certainty. It's not going to be easy, but we'll take it one step at a time. And I'll be right here, every step of the way. He gave me a faint smile, and though it wasn't much, it meant everything. As we got out of the car, I could already feel the first steps of a new chapter starting to unfold. It wasn't going to be perfect, but we were going to get through this. And maybe, just maybe, we'd come out stronger on the other side. Before we walked into the house, I turned to him one last time. No matter what happens, remember this, you're not alone. And I'm proud of you. He looked at me for a long moment, then, almost shyly, he said, Thanks, man. I think I needed to hear that. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like things might actually be okay. That's the end of the story. I hope you liked it. Let me know if you want to discuss any part of it or need anything else.